Hi, welcome to No Barriers. I'm Jane Close Conoley. I'm president at Cal State Long Beach. And I'm joined today with three experts on a topic of very important local, national, and regional concern. I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves now.
Thank you for having me. My name is Rashida Crutchfield, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work here at Cal State Long Beach.
Great, welcome.
I'm Jeff Klaus. I serve as the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs here at Cal State Long Beach.
Great. So glad you could join us.
And I'm Dina Perrone, an Associate Professor in Criminology and Criminal Justice here at Cal State Long Beach.
Well, thank you so much. And each of you comes from a somewhat different perspective on this topic. And so I thought I'd just start by saying, your research, Professor Crutchfield, was really very influential in my beginning to understand that food insecurity and precarious housing was not just a problem out there on the streets, but actually inside on the campus. Could you tell us some more about your research?
Sure. So I think you're not alone in presuming that homelessness and hunger are issues that are not important in higher education, but we found that those issues really are presented here and across the country in our higher education campuses. So in 2015, our Chancellor of the CSU, Chancellor Timothy White, commissioned me to lead preliminary study on food insecurity and homelessness in the CSU. And then we did a full survey across all 23 campuses and did interviews and focus groups with students at 11 campuses and found that over 40% of our students were experiencing what we call low food security, meaning that they were either getting food that was nutritionally deficient or missing meals. And then over 10% of our students were experiencing homelessness. So that's not living in a fixed, regular, or adequate place to stay.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean that 10% of our students are on the street, and this is what some people think, but it really means what you've just described. They don't have a lease, they might be staying with somebody, couch surfing, or it's intermittent. They might be in their car. Is that right?
Right. So I think when we think of homelessness, for a lot of people, when we envision homelessness, we think about someone who we see as we're driving on the freeway or stopping at a light. And there are students who are living in those circumstances, but a lot of our students are living in their car. As you said, they might be dorm surfing or couch surfing, so moving from place to place. So last year I was doing a lot of traveling, as I'm sure you understand, and I was feeling exhausted from moving from hotel to hotel, and I was thinking about how privileged a perspective that was, because I know where I'm going to be every day, but that instability just for me was exhausting. For our students, it's that much more influential on their physical and mental health, because they don't know where they're going to go, and they're not living in a hotel. They might be living in a car one day with a friend another, and that instability is influencing everything they do.
Mm-hmm. And I know as we go through, let's remind each other that we should also talk about how that affects their success in their academics. But now we've heard from Rashida's research about 23 campuses. That encompasses 480,000 students. This is a large group of students, but how does this reflect, and Dina, I think you have some special information on this, what's happening in the country or in California or in the bigger context, and are we reflecting that, or are we worse off or better off? Or?
In fact, about 13% of 18 to 25-year-olds are experiencing homelessness in some form, whether it be couch surfing or living in cars or living on the street. Mm-hmm. And we find that there are certain young people who are much more likely to be in those positions, 18 to 25-year-olds who are Black or brown, people who identify as LGBTQ, and then young mothers tend to be within that statistic.
So vulnerable on many dimensions,
yes.
and not surprisingly,
exactly
this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeff is Associate Vice President, and I know you've been leading our campus efforts So let's do a little deep dive on the campus efforts and then come back and talk about other aspects of this.
Sure. When you mentioned student success, I was immediately thinking in terms of what both Rashida and Dina were talking about. Just when you think of how difficult that must be with students trying to figure out where they're going to get their next meal or where they're going to sleep tonight, and they're still trying to make it to class every day, do the homework, do the research that needs to be done. So we have such resilient, amazing students. So we're very fortunate to have experts like this on the campus in our faculty ranks. So obviously we relied very heavily on Dr. Crutchfield immediately when we were talking as a campus. And what I think is unique about Cal State Long Beach compared to a lot of our sister institutions and certainly across the country is that our process, how we came about this whole service to the populations was based very organically. It was a group of faculty, staff, and students that said, I think we can do a better job. Let's not just refer students out to the community. We're very fortunate in Long Beach that we have great services, but we just didn't feel like that connection was being made at the level so that we felt it should. So we thought we can do something that's for emergency situations. And so at this point, under your leadership, you were very supportive from day one and even provided some of the financial support to get this started. We have emergency short-term housing for students. We have emergency grants of up to $500 for students. And we have a beach pantry. We also have a program called Feed a Need, where students in our residence halls donate meals each semester, and then we're able to use those meals that students provided to give back to students in need. So we also do case management work with them, so we're following up. But it's really a very comprehensive system, and thanks to Dr. Crutchfield, we feel very confident that ours is one of the premier in the country based on her recommendations, her research, and then us as a caring campus community figuring out ways to implement these processes to support students.
Wow, it is comprehensive, but as you said, it's an emergency effort. And so when you mentioned case management, I really perked up because to me, that must be a critical part of a longer term solution. Mm-hmm. Am I right, or do you have thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we really benefit from in our program is the partnership that we have with the School of Social Work, right? Because what we've found is that social workers, along with students from our education programs as well, are trained to work directly with folks who are experiencing trauma, because that is what our students are experiencing. When you don't have food in your belly on a regular basis or don't know where you're going to stay, that's a traumatic experience, particularly if it accumulates over time. And so social workers are uniquely trained to be able to identify and support the needs of our students, and also have the skills to make referrals and know how to really help navigate public social services, because we know that our public benefits like CalFresh, otherwise known as SNAP, which a lot of people think of as food stamps, has some particular eligibility or exclusionary requirements that make it much more difficult, for instance, for a student in higher ed to qualify. So social workers are uniquely able to do that, and so we have staffed our program with social work interns, which is a great opportunity because then they get that practical experience but come with that training as well.
Yeah, intensive case management has actually been the most successful in getting people who are experiencing homelessness into homes, into permanent housing. But it's not immediate. In fact, it takes, for some people who've been experiencing homelessness for 5 years, even decades, it takes 6 months, 7 months just to get them to consider being housed, because it's so different from what they've experienced. But if you have a really well-trained case manager who sticks with them throughout those 6 months, they begin to see some significant changes. Mm-hmm. And in Los Angeles, we have a housing first model in which it's the house before you demand anything else from the person who's experiencing homelessness. So what that means is that if the person's experiencing addiction or mental health instabilities, then they will be housed and they will receive case management when they're housed, and they'll receive rehabilitation services once they're housed. Mm-hmm. And that continues. And the data on Housing First programs is pretty impressive, because what they find is those people tend to remain housed for at least 5 years after.
That's
which
so
is
important.
when
Yeah.
they usually stop collecting the data.
So in contrast to that would be programs where you have to be clean and sober before we house you. I've also heard of situations where, well, you can't bring your pet, or you can't be housed, or you have a partner and no, it's only a single thing. So this is a way to reduce the barriers to actual recovery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about spouses and even with children, we still have, I would say, a dearth of housing that supports those individuals, right? I think there we still need to do a lot of work with people who are parents and have their children, or even with pets. But I think Los Angeles is moving in the right direction there.
That's really good to hear, and I know we can learn a lot from everybody around us and what they're doing. When we think about people who've been homeless 5 years, as you say, our students, that doesn't jump right to my mind that that's who our students are. So in your experiences, what are the what's the trajectories of our students? How do they get there? What are some of the causes, or what are some of the pathways that have gotten them to this kind of traumatic situation? Because these are resilient students, as you mentioned. They're at the university. They've already many have beaten the odds by getting here. So what's gone wrong, or what's up with them as far as you've experienced?
I think what's important for me to say first is that there's no one face of this, right? That I think it's important to hear individual stories and yet make sure that we're understanding that there's dynamic differences in what happens for people. And also, your question is a really interesting one, because it has layers, right? So for some students, they may have experienced homelessness while they were in K-12, and that instability hasn't changed simply because they've come to college. Some of our students, we know that quite a few of our students are students who are not 18 to 24. They're adults and may have experienced challenges or interruptions in their income for a variety of reasons. But as Dina, as you said earlier, we know that this issue disproportionately impacts people of color. From our survey, our students who are Black or African American are far more likely to experience homelessness than anyone else. And we can talk about issues of racism, of classism, of marginalization that are embedded in available work and in available wage. It's a complex issue.
History of a family trajectory for generations back.
That's right.
Yeah.
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 When it really, with our program, we've noticed it really does run the gamut. I mean, from students that come out to their parents and are kicked out right before the start of a semester, from domestic violence, needing to get out of an unhealthy situation immediately. I mean, it really, there's not one clear indicator. I think what Dr. Crutchfield pointed out earlier is, with our students, most folks would not necessarily identify it. It's, a lot of folks feel like, well, I suffered with top ramen and things like that when I was in college, but this is very different. This is a lack of full support that they just don't have. And for many students, the university environment actually has the most level of support that they can get. I mean, we have, from our Student Rec and Wellness Center to 24-hour study centers to our health center. I mean, not to mention our basic needs program that provides the food and some of the immediate housing. So we've got some supports in place, and the case managers that will follow up over the long haul. So I really think that it's not the solution, it's simply part of trying to help students, kind of passing the baton, making sure that we get them connected to additional long-term resources, which I think is essential.
It is critical. In fact, if you are homeless, the longer you are homeless, the harder it is for you to reconnect with all of those resources. And I think it's important that what Jeff is mentioning about domestic violence, what we see is that like 40% of women who are homeless because they've experienced some sort of domestic violence or sexual assault.
40%.
Yeah.
That's huge.
No, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. It's actually about 40% of women are homeless, and then 90% of those women are homeless because of domestic violence or sexual assault.
Okay.
So I
in the
apologize.
population, okay.
Yeah, of
great.
the women, of the homeless population, about 40% of them are women, and 90% of them are there because of sexual assault trauma or domestic violence trauma.
Well, both of those numbers surprised me because I wouldn't have thought that 40% of the homeless were women. The men seemed more visible
Right,
to me. Yeah.
I think, well, and that's a lot of the perception of homelessness is that it's heavily male, but men often can't find a place to stay. Women often, or well, not often, because no matter who you are, it can be quite difficult to find housing once you're experiencing homelessness. But women sometimes have access to some resources, particularly if they have their children with them, or may be able to connect to people who will allow them stay in the home, whereas men may not.
Well, it seems like a daunting problem, and we've identified some things on campus. It sounds like we've learned some things from around the region, but I'm sure we're all experiencing that there are gaps. I mean, if you could pick, and we might have to keep going after our break, but have you been thinking about, what are we not doing that we should be doing? I mean, we're committed to taking students from across the array of economic situations, and every qualified young person or older person who applies. But so the problem's not going to go away, given what you've told us, Dina. Do you see big gaps in what we're doing? Or even tiny gaps, because tiny would be better. We could fix those faster, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for like what Cal State Long Beach is doing. I mean, I will say that I know Rashida mentioned about how young people who are experiencing homelessness, kindergarten through 12th grade, a lot of those young people seem to be in the foster care system. So I don't know what our connections are with young people who are in foster care once they come here.
I think Jeff knows something about that, so we should tuck that away for a conversation.
Yeah, so I think that's important. I will say though that I don't think faculty know. Like I could speak for myself as a faculty member. I never really, I know that people are homeless and students are homeless, but I wasn't aware that my own students were homeless. Like I understand there's students that are homeless, but my own students. And it didn't come out to me until a student told me in like a journal article that he wrote about that, I live in my car. And then that put things in perspective for me, and so I think more compassion from the faculty to have them understand the plight of their students, I think would be really, really helpful.
And we are very fortunate that faculty are paying attention to the essays and the conversations that they have with students and are trying to refer them to appropriate resources. In fact, that's a big part of how the program was started, because we were getting more and more referrals about food insecurity and housing insecurity, and that's what really prompted us to say, we need to be doing something.
Wow. So just not to interrupt, but are most of the referrals from faculty, or some big proportion of them?
Yeah, definitely faculty are a big piece. Our counseling center is another, our health center, and now that the program's been around for a few years, students are hearing more from their peers and just doing searches. So we're very fortunate that we have gotten some publicity about the program. I think mainly because Dr. Crutchfield is an expert, and so
she's everywhere.
Yeah, and the program follows her site, so we're very lucky.
Yeah. But Dina's, I'm sure what you say is equally valid. There was certainly, my experience has been some faculty will find things out, and then they are, they have empathy and they'll do it, but they're not necessarily talking to somebody in another department.
Right.
And so I'm always shocked at what people don't know about what we do. So I suppose that's information for me about pushing out more information and education.
And certainly for us, for me as well, in terms of, are we doing enough with faculty orientations? Are we how many times are we sending out? What publications are we putting it in so that faculty and staff can be fully aware of the programs that we have, like the Guardian Scholars, which helps with our foster youth students.
Right.
And that's been a growing population for us, and certainly the support mechanisms that we've put in place over the last few years under Dr. John Hamilton's leadership have been great. It's really important for students to feel welcome and know that they have a place to feel secure, and then not only do they get that environment, but we're also identifying resources that are unique to that population that we're able to provide. So it's very special once the students connect, but not all students that are foster youth are necessarily in the Guardian Scholars program. So we have to continue that education, not only to faculty, staff, but students as well.
I was just going to ask, is it all self-referral that a student has to tell us, I've been in the foster system, or I'm just exiting from the foster system?
Part of the information that we get,
No, of course.
is through the FAFSA.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're able to find out some of that
And the
information.
FAFSA, for those who don't know, the acronym is the federal form we fill out for financial aid, yeah.
Thanks.
I don't know
Yeah.
what it really stands
Yeah.
for, but I just know financial federal aid, yeah.
So that's where we get some of that information.
Yeah. Yeah. I was-
Your question was, what are the places that we're missing? And I think on campus, I'm really proud of the program that we have. And I'm hopeful to see, I know that we are able to provide services for students when they have an emergency situation, but some of our students are dealing with more chronic issues. And so I look forward to the ability and capacity to really support them with a longer hand, right?
Yeah. Well, I've thought of that. That's a daunting challenge, isn't it? Have I already used daunting 4 times? Excuse me, I'll come up with a different. Because we really, we don't really have that infrastructure in place,
Right.
and it would really take some rethinking and reallocation of resources. Very well deserved, but it's a big idea.
And I think about the opportunities that you're taking and that we're taking to continue to expand our connections with our community, our Long Beach community. I mean, clearly across the country in our urban settings, as we develop to business centers, and we also have to think about affordable housing. And I think that's a responsibility that you've taken on in your partnerships, but also it is a community effort. It can't be just us. We have to work together with our city governments and our local nonprofits to really rally around our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness, and we also get to reframe homelessness on campus, but also outside, because clearly in LA County, and definitely right now in Orange County, we've got lots of folks who would love to address homelessness by moving people away. And we get to learn that our neighbors who are homeless live with us and amongst us and not outside of us.
I actually have a student who's doing, his name is Enrique Hernandez, and he did a qualitative study of the homeless population in Santa Ana. And just his sample was really fascinating to me, because a lot of them had some college education.
Really?
3 of them have bachelor's degrees, two of them have AA degrees. I mean, it's a small sample, but I think it's just really important for us to think about homelessness, not just of like those who never graduate high school, but it could be our students who leave here from Cal State Long Beach and can still end up homelessness. And then there's like 2 reasons that they highlight as their issue for their homelessness. One has been affordable housing, and the second one has been that they've fallen to some disability at work and they're unable to work, and that has made them now unable to afford any sort of housing, especially when the housing's not affordable.
Yeah, I've wondered if some of our more chronically homeless are still, suffering from the effects of the recession, losing a home and maybe losing a family, losing a job, and how that, there's some people who have not recovered from that, from what I can tell.
So one of the things that you mentioned, Dr. Perrone, was about student parents, or at least the research shows that families struggle as well. And so in terms of our program, that's an area that we have struggled in terms of serving student parents, because our residence halls currently do not house children for liability reasons. So that has created some challenges when we have students, and we've had a few where we've tried to connect to hotels and things of that nature, but it is definitely an area that we need to improve.
Well, and that would feel all the more desperate, doesn't it, when it's not just you,
Yes.
it's
When
you
they're
and
showing up with their babies, and
Yes.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. Wow, and I'm sure that many people listening to this will remain surprised despite what they see around them and maybe perhaps what they read. You mentioned, Rashida, very kindly that I've been involved in a partnership, and I want us to talk more about the Long Beach Task Force, what we call Everyone Home Task Force, and what that's trying to do in our little part of the world, and why I was selected to do that was because we've been so outspoken about homelessness among our students. So I think they thought, well, there's a natural connection there. You know, she'll take on that job. But I have thought that the systemic issues of affordable housing, like just the economic structure of housing, is a huge threat. So I'd be interested in your views on that. And then you've mentioned these could be our students, but in fact that perception that these homeless people are nothing like me. They're nothing like my family. You know, they're just people who are lazy or they're drug addicted, and that was their fault that they got to be that way. And so that, what do we call that? NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And I've heard other groups now saying we need a YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. But do we have some ideas when we get back from our break about what moves us? We've embraced probably I don't want to say it's easy, but one of the easier populations of those experiencing homelessness, because we have all these students in the best anti-poverty program in the world, a university degree. So there's hope at the end of the tunnel. But I really am concerned about that pushing off, like trying to move people away from us, as if they're not us. And is that resonating with any of you in the last 30 seconds before we break? A 30-second resonance, yeah?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
I think we're seeing that everywhere, and I'm interested in what we're going to say about how to fix that.
I am very interested, and that's why I got you three here. So we've had a great conversation thus far about kind of the big picture nationally on homelessness, and then specifically close to home about the percentages of our own students and what we've done and what we're doing for them. And we've mentioned, some of the gaps, but some are tiny. We could probably come up with a little tweak, but some are much more scary in a sense in terms of meeting chronic needs. And so when we get back, let's talk more about YIMBYism and NIMBYism and how that might relate to how we educate the next generation of students. So thanks so much for the conversation thus far, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Make a difference in someone's life. Teachers, principals, and guidance counselors can have an enormous impact on students' lives. Be that person. Be the inspiration to empower others to be the best that they can be. You can become a part of this exciting field with a degree from Cal State Long Beach.
Well, welcome back to No Barriers, a show from Cal State Long Beach in which we discuss with experts ways to remove barriers to success for our students and our community. I'm joined today by Dr. Crutchfield, Dr. Klaus, and Dr. Perrone, surrounded by doctors who know a lot of stuff. And we ended the last segment with these kind of funny sounding acronyms, but they're not funny at all. This NIMBYism, and what would be the opposite would be a good thing, YIMBYism. So let's define what those are, and let's talk about that a little bit more.
So NIMBYism is not in my backyard. And it's been used a lot to prevent the construction of affordable housing or housing first type of programs in a variety of cities. Fullerton right now has been fighting a lot on on NIMBYism. They've been going to their city councils to fight against housing first construction that would house a significant amount of those who are suffering from homelessness.
And the rationale for people, I know it's pretty obvious, but we should put it on the table, I guess.
There's a large misconception about the homeless population. I think many fear that the homeless population are violent or are offenders, and so I think there's just a lot of fear around having them living in their neighborhood.
What would be more accurate about the homeless population when you say people fear that they're offenders or having them in the neighborhood will be dangerous? What's more?
Yeah, please
do. Sorry.
I used to work at Covenant House, California, which is a shelter for homeless youth, and our executive director there, George Lozano at the time, used to say, you know, when we were bringing Covenant House in, people really didn't want it. You know, this was going to be young people, 18 to 24 years old, who were experiencing homelessness. So the perception was that they would bring in crime. I also hear people say things like, well, the walking traffic, which is a nice way to say I don't want to see you in near me or in my house. Would somehow diminish or lower property value. But what he would remind us was that research says that if you bring people a place to live, then they're not going to commit crimes. And that's not to say that people who are homeless commit crimes, because that's not, sometimes we criminalize homelessness because it is not a crime to be homeless. Sometimes people will call the police and say, you know, there's a homeless person in my yard. Well, the police often do and should say, well, they haven't. It is not a crime to be homeless. But if you bring in a place for someone to stay, they're less likely to need, and that need is served by homelessness. So it is a misconception that someone who is, you know, if we have housing, that somehow there's going to be more crime, when that's not the case. I'm in fact more likely to be harmed by someone who I know than someone who is living on the street.
That's certainly the statistics on our campus as well. When we talk about assaults of any kind, it's usually from
And we do have our criminal justice expert.
She knows these things.
No, I mean, Rashida's absolutely right. I mean, the homeless population, especially those who live in encampments, rarely ever come into contact with the criminal justice system because they've created their own kind of living situation that's pretty insulated, and so it's really about getting them into homes where they are safe, where their health is taken care of, where they can get reunited with families often, building community, and so we find that, you know, putting them in housing is actually what, you know, it addresses all of the problems that that communities have, especially when you're talking about they're always concerned about real estate. Right. And, you know, my property value is going to go down. But what you find is once you have housing for people versus having the homeless population visible, you actually see that their housing values are not affected at all. Right. And there's been really strong data on that because they have a lot of buildings that have been constructed for those who are suffering from homelessness, and they haven't seen the impact that community members often fear.
Yeah, so that NIMBYism is really based in fear that's unfounded. We're seeing a lot of that these days.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear. But so it really it strikes me that there's a stigma associated with homelessness. You know, you're being blamed for this trauma that's happened to you. I'd like to hear from all of you about how our students might experience that, and certainly how people who are not our students are experiencing it.
Well, I know that's always an issue for us, and why when we created the program, we wanted to make sure that students only had to share their story one time with one person that would help continue that support. We know that taking that first step of even getting support is usually kind of that biggest barrier. Once they get in that door and actually receive some immediate support, then a little bit more trust is built, and then we're able to possibly make those connections to the City of Long Beach resources. We're very fortunate to have it's called the Good Seed, and it's a partnership with the Multi-Services Center.
Oh, yeah.
It's a nonprofit, but they partner with the Multi-Services Center, and it's for 16 to 25-year-old youth. It's for transitional youth, and a lot of times the Multi-Services Center in Long Beach will actually refer students to the Good Seed, and if they don't have transportation, they'll arrange for an Uber or a taxi, whatever it takes to get them there. So it's those kind of connections that are so critical, and now we have that connection with the Good Seed, so we're all trying to work together, but there still is a stigma associated with, you know, being homeless and kind of coming out with that as your story.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, when we start talking about providing services, either for students or for people out in the community, assume that people are just going to come and take something because it's free. I think a lot of people start out with, well, what kind of stipulations or what kind of eligibility requirements are we going to add, because if it's free, someone will just take it. But what we've found over and over again is that students will wait until they are absolutely desperate before they come in the door, because they don't.
Is that right?
Yeah, and part of that is I hear students over and over again saying, it's really hard for me, but I'm sure it's harder for someone else.
Oh, wow.
We do hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Where it's like, no, somebody else needs it more.
Yeah, and it's like, no, you actually need
Yeah.
a meal, and you need a place to stay, and you need that every day. And so helping students reframe this sort of hierarchical idea of need, and really honoring and growing this this love for help seeking, rather than saying, oh, well, you know, I don't want to be a taker, and I don't want to be seen as a taker, you know, as someone who's going to take things. But we are a generous family community. We are a campus family. And so helping people, again, you know, think of food scholarships, or think of their value is a value to all of us. And so really challenging students on thinking about how they see themselves helps them know that they can find support, and also then we have to train and help and educate our community so that we receive them well.
I think that our students would be very vulnerable to this now, because there's such a national dialogue really about takers, and blaming a lot of people for being takers and being dangerous. And so it seems like it would make it even more urgent for us to have a counter narrative, and of course, not just talk, but action.
Well, and it's interesting because there's a lot of negativity associated with food stamps, and so CalFresh with the SNAP program, it's even just naming it CalFresh has helped, right? And then Carol Menard here at the campus, she came up with, I thought, just a great phrase called food scholarships, because students don't like to get things from the government necessarily. They want to do it on their own, which is great, and it's very respectable. However, when we can phrase it as a food scholarship, something that is available to them to make their life less complicated, to give them just a little bit of extra support. I mean, these are the things that with the interns that we have now on campus that will help students, because one of the barriers that students have is there's a lot of paperwork, and it's pretty daunting to fill out those official forms. So we have interns that will literally help walk them through it. And then we even have outreach days, which one is coming up next week, where we'll have the social services department here on campus and be able to qualify students that day. They won't have to wait the traditional 30 days. So it's really just a phenomenal process.
And so we do that we're going to do that periodically to allow people to sign up, and they can be on a program, CalFresh, SNAP, just that day. Huh?
Yeah, we've done it. This will be the second one this semester. We'll definitely do a couple next semester as well. It's part of a grant that Chico is the kind of the primary sponsor, and then
CSU Chico. Huh?
Yes, and we're a subcontractor under that grant.
So we're working to reduce the stigma, but we know that there's a lot out there, and it strikes me. We talked about race earlier, women with children, but it strikes me there's other members of our population of students who come with other stigmas, and most recently, in my experience, are a focus on formerly incarcerated students. They seem to me to be vulnerable for homelessness as well, and I'm wondering if I'm right about that.
Well, what we find is that those who are just newly released are the ones who struggle the most, because once they're released and they've been incarcerated for how many years, or even if it's been a month or two, their connections might have been severed. And so when they're released, they really have no place to go, and they often are suffering from some state of homelessness. I can't speak for our students. I don't know their housing situation. We do have a group of students called the Rising Scholars who work very hard on supporting each other, and these are students who were formerly incarcerated or at least impacted by the criminal justice system. And so it's been a student driven organization, and they have been working very hard to support each other through the university process. And as Jeff mentioned, that there is a lot of paperwork and a lot of forms, and having that kind of support is critical to their success.
Mm-hmm. The paperwork and the forms seem to be unavoidable. I have them on my desk as well, but not for something that's important. But I think having access to social work interns and maybe others, that is a stroke of genius, because then you're not sitting there trying to understand what does that little box, what are they really asking me?
Well, and then if you fill it out wrong, and you go through all of that and you fill it out wrong, and then the county declines you, and I'm already hesitant about taking it I'm already hesitant for accessing it in the first place, then a lot of our students feel defeated. But we're trying to streamline that process for our students.
And what I think is key that we're trying as a community is we're using students. So peer-to-peer, and a lot of times we know from research that students prefer that. So not only with the interns, but then also with the Feed a Need program where students are donating the meals. There's the ASI student government, which it is our student-led organization, created the Beach Pantry on our campus. So they're the ones that are arranging, and thousands of students are using the Beach Pantry on a regular basis. So it's really helping, I think, get students in the door, because it's students supporting students.
What are some of the details about the Beach Pantry? When I go into the community, many people ask me, well, how many meals, you may not know, so I don't feel put on the spot, but,
I got it.
You got it, okay, Steve's got it, yeah. You can tell we didn't rehearse all this, but yeah.
So students are able to come anytime during the week. They can visit the pantry up to 3 times with their student ID card, and they can receive up to 5 items each time that they come through.
Okay, so 15 items
and
a week.
In addition to the food, there's also kind of a swap shop with school supplies and things like that they can just take that's available, and people just drop those off if they have extra items. We have toiletry kits that we create, so students can have access to shampoo and toothpaste and toothbrushes and things like that.
So do you?
This is why we have these meetings
So do you,
on TV.
do you accept like donations? Like, how does that even work? Are there?
As it turns out, we always accept donations. In fact,
We can say that about the whole university.
Yeah,
we do accept donations. Yeah.
I mean, the reality is we couldn't do this program without the donations, because all of the grants and really the housing that we provide, we have to pay for that through outside funding. So luckily we have great alumni and community, faculty and staff that have contributed, and that I've seen the names. So, people donate, and we're able to run these programs.
Well, maybe you can talk about the We Got Your Back program.
Sure. So We've Got Your Back is a new partnership, and we are literally the first university that this nonprofit in Orange County has ever worked with.
Wow.
They've primarily worked with K through 12 organizations, and the We've Got Your Back is a program where they provide a backpack to a K through 12 student that has some food needs, and so they get a backpack filled with 3 to 4 days worth of food for a family of 4. At the end of the week, they turn in the backpack and get a new one. So what we've done is we've contracted with them. We're finalizing that now so that we'll be able to offer the same level of service. We're piloting with a small group just to see, but we are targeting our parenting students as a first target population.
Oh, good.
And that same nonprofit, they also have a program that is great that's going to support the pantry, where we can receive a pallet of goods from the nonprofit, but they get Costco return overstock, and so literally we're going to get 3 pallets a month from this organization, and we only have to pay $200.
Wow.
And it can be thousands of dollars worth of material. And what's great is we kind of have a shopping list, and they will do their best to try to match what our requests are with what they have available.
Well, that's fabulous. So this is called We've Got Your Back, and it's a foundation in Orange County. I have to, tell me.
Giving Children Hope is the name of the nonprofit in Orange County, and the program that's kind of the backpack one is We've Got Your Back.
Wow.
So I don't know what we're going to call ours, but we'll come up with something.
It'll be beach something. Though, yeah.
It's got to be. It's got to be
a beach thing. Yeah.
Beach bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was coined.
There it is. Thank you, Dina.
You're welcome.
Well, I've thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, that food is one thing. When I go to the community, I often get people who go, well, I'd give to the pantry. And organizing that is something else. But the housing seems really tough, and because we don't have affordable housing around us. And so what are your thoughts about that? I mean, this is so structural to Southern California that, and we've talked about, not in my backyard, people don't, what are your, besides hopelessness, which is not allowed on the show, not an option. What are your thoughts about that? Am I right in thinking that the structural problem of housing is really daunting? I see it as a threat to us as a university, for faculty coming, for staff staying, so on and so forth.
Well, I was going to use your word daunting again, right? I think, as I've been involved in conversations across the CSU and across the nation with administrations and campuses, I think a lot of us start with pantries because it's like, okay, you're hungry, here's some food. We can do that. But thinking about housing is a whole nother level of creative opportunity. Recently, I learned about an organization called Homelessness, which is located in East Los Angeles, and they are focused on housing for transitional age youth, so about 18 to 24.
Youth in Spanish, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so they have a program specifically for college success. And so they have students who live in their transitional housing, and then they have student peers on community college campuses. And so the campus has that person who understands their needs, and then they have a place to stay. So I'm very excited about that model. And I think about that model, I have big dreams for us with, we have not so far away the Villages of Cabrillo that has this huge campus. And I think, how can we, along with places like the Good Seed and how can we make those links as well? I'm not sure, and that's something that take longer conversations, but I think it is that university community partnership, and also then the integrated conversation with the city about affordable housing. Yeah.
Well, I am happy to report that we are going to Villages of Cabrillo next week, I believe, for kind of a conversation to see how we might be able to build that partnership. I'd like to throw out kind of a random thought. I mean, it's kind of,
It's time.
I know.
It's time, yeah.
But we have over 320,000 alums. 80%, well, it's
a big percent.
two-thirds.
Yeah,
Two-thirds live in Orange County and LA County. So we have a large population of alums that we know, since they came through this great institution, that they want to give back. And so I believe that if we can tell this story and let our alums see the need, because once they know that there's truly a need, I think they would open up their homes. With that many folks around the area. And we've had some that have actually offered. We actually have a faculty member right now that we had a student come through that's in dire straits for a place. We made the connection. We don't like to tell the university attorney that, but we went ahead and...
No one will know.
Right. So we made those connections behind the scenes, but I think there's a lot more opportunity like that if we can, work through literally some of the, just the liability concerns. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think we have some opportunities that we haven't yet explored.
I'm also familiar with faculty who have done that too, like hearing of a student who is in need and then taking the student in for however long, and then, when the student figures something out or then they move on. But
Well, it's
it
interesting.
has
We used to do
been
it for international students. I don't know if
Yeah.
that still happens. So there are models. It's just
Yeah.
a matter of, are we putting a stigma because of the population and saying, we have to work through just to see how we can move forward.
I've heard about models of using, empty nesters, and we have, given that our university is 70 years old, we have some alums who are definitely empty nesters at this time, and for a small amount of rent, plus some minimal service like I will drive you to the grocery store, I will, take out the garbage, all decided ahead of time and agreed to, obviously, have been able and actually very grateful to have a young person in their home. And obviously it's all about match and all about commitment, but I love your idea. There are 320,000 alums, and most are as you said, in our area, but I don't think we have presented this to them in a way that they would feel or see an opening for their involvement. I mean, the easy thing is to, and we always would take a check, write a check for the food pantry. Sure. The harder thing is really the homeless thing, but I love that idea, and I think we still do some of it for international students, and people will talk. They'll really wax poetic about the international student they had, and so why wouldn't they do the same about the?
Well, especially the stories that our students have will just blow our alums away, or community members that are willing to open up their homes. So if we can make those matches, it will be a match made in heaven.
I don't know if any of you are kind of up for this, but it was on my mind to, without revealing any identities, I wonder if people understand, maybe can you share a story? I mean, I'm not sure that listeners to this show or in the community actually understand the trauma that some students are bringing with them.
Yeah.
But yet they've shown up, so they've proved their resilience.
Well, I was thinking when you said that, when you were talking about the empty nesters, I was thinking that when the research goes out, I get lots of emails, and some of them are not that lovely, but lots of them are really people asking, "What can I do?" And I did have someone who said, I have an extra room. My kids are off, and I would love to house someone, and I wasn't sure what my role was in that, but I actually had a student at the time who was in the School of Social Work, and she was a master's student, and we'd been working with her. She'd gone through our program, but also we were, as a school social work family, working with her as well. But she was living, her father is undocumented. She is documented, but her father was undocumented, and she and her family, along with another family, were living in a studio together. And so that was a lot of people, and she's a master's student. So she was working for pay, working her internship, and going full-time to school. And sometimes sleeping in her car, occasionally sleeping in a corner in the studio, occasionally sleeping with friends. And she didn't want to drop out. She knew that getting a master's would really, change her life. But she wasn't sure she was going to make it. And so we housed her on campus for a bit, and then she ended up moving in with this woman who had contacted me, and she gave her a few months. And now that student did graduate with her master's, and she's at Arizona State for her PhD.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Now that's a success story.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But it took all those points.
All of those pieces.
Yeah, all those pieces to make it work. Yeah. Does a student occur to you, or a conglomerate?
Well, there's so many. One of the great stories that I think is a success is that we had a student that literally was kicked out of his home the weekend before he started school. He was 17 years old, came out to his parents, they kicked him out. So he shows up at school, no place to live. Luckily, he had a friend that let him couch surf for a while. We were able to get the student connected to our emergency housing. With our relationship with financial aid as part of the process, he was able to do a dependency override.
Why don't you explain what that means?
Okay, a dependency override is, and I'm by no means a financial aid expert, but normally when a student is coming to school, they're on their parents'
Income, yeah.
for tax purposes.
Yeah.
And so a dependency override would be the student going through the process to say, I'm independent, I'm on my own. And what that does is it qualifies the student for more aid.
Because there's no family contribution at all. There's nothing is expected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the student was in emergency housing and then transitioned into our regular housing, which it's the same. It's just he was officially in long-term. Student became a part of the student government within the residence halls, which then provided free housing and meals. So it was like he became a leader within housing and has become a leader on campus. And to me, that's just a perfect example of how we were able to provide a little bit of support, get him connected to the resources that we have available, and here's a student success story.
Mm-hmm. That must feel good, because we've used the word daunting, but I love to use the word success at the same time. Success is really good. Well, we've really covered a lot of territory. We only have a minute left. Any last word before I wrap up? And
I'm just really glad that you're having this conversation. I mean, given the climate that we're in now, but also like the economic conditions that our students are facing, I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. And I'm just really glad that you brought this to the table.
Well, thank you, and thank you for doing that. We have covered a lot of territory because we've talked about structural and really systemic issues about the cost of housing and the tendency for others to stigmatize those who are homeless or who are poor. Somehow we blame them for that. But we've also talked about some of the good outcomes of the programming we've been able to do on campus, and you've let us know about successes in our region. But certainly what is out there for me still to consider and think about is the need to keep the voice loud about that these students are here with us, and so everybody's as empathic as you are. And then this idea of using our alum network, because the real prize there is being able to respond more holistically and for longer term to student needs, because at their best they're going to be with us for 4 years, right? And so we don't want their graduation and their future success, as your master's student proves that this is possible, to be compromised by something that we could have a influence on. So thank you, Professor Crutchfield, Dr. Klaus, Dr. Perrone. I'm so grateful for your expertise, and so thank you for listening to No Barriers. This has been about homelessness, but we're on our way to remove every barrier in the way of our students. Thank you very much.